and the momentum is getting stronger.
Compared to control sites, there's more DNA damage and chromosome damage.
And so they conclude that the significantly increased levels in IDNA thus portend a true effect of e-waste. This is a particularly stark example of an interconnected environmental and political problem, but in Palestine, anything the museum writes is politicized.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We start with a video from 350 about their success in a campaign to get colleges and other institutions to sell off their stock in fossil fuel companies. And the numbers we're talking about are trillions of dollars.
Around the world, people are saying our money won't fund climate change and are divesting from the fossil fuel industry's climate-wrecking business plan. 1 year ago, we set out an ambitious goal to get $10 trillion divested from fossil fuels by 2020. Well, we've done it and more. And the momentum is getting stronger. What began with a handful of universities, faith groups, and foundations has become over 1,100 institutions playing a key role in shifting trillions of dollars away from fossil fuels and into climate solutions.
We Catholics are divesting from fossil fuels as part of a big movement that includes universities and pension funds and banks and many more institutions. We're divesting because it's the right thing to do. We're divesting because fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas are toxic to our planet and everyone who shares this common home.
By divesting from fossil fuels and reinvesting in renewable energy, we can build the scale of climate change solutions, particularly to serve poorer energy communities, while simultaneously eroding the social license the fossil fuel companies have to continue to operate. Join this movement to finance a just energy future.
And a reminder from the not-so-distant past about the climate strikes.
Into a world in which my future is being stolen from me. We're here to write a new story, a story in which our country is doing everything in its power to address not only the climate crisis, but the systemic injustices at its roots.
Час діяти, планета в небезпеці. Ми хочемо зупинити видобуток кукурудзяного палива. Ми хочемо, щоб Україна перейшла на відновлювальні джерела енергії. І ми хочемо це зараз.
Next, a video from the Palestine Museum of Natural History, featuring its director Mazen Kumsia. included is some eye-opening content about how electronic waste is sent to Palestine for disposal.
They are building and building and building and expanding into this area, and then they say there's going to be a Palestinian state.
If you take a plane to Tel Aviv, you will arrive at a modern metropolis. You can take a train and then a bus to Jerusalem. It will take about an hour. No time to stop at the Western Wall. There's another wall which demands your attention. If you take the bus from Damascus Gate, it will lead you through a maze of segregated roads to the checkpoint. Ignore the big red signs, they're just there to terrify you. Pass through the checkpoint, then you will be in Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem and the Wall, and in between Beit Jala and Beit Sahur.
All this land belongs to people of Beit Sahur, but now they set up these so-called security fences. By the way, just behind there, if you look, there's another Palestinian area. So this settlement sits between Palestinian areas, Palestinian town of Beit Sahur, and that Palestinian village called Sabahra.
Next comes a drive down a two-way street, smushed into one lane by the Wall.
Here is a house of a friend of mine, Marian Stars. The wall comes on all the
Oh my God.
sides of their house.
We are right here. Our aunt's land is here. They lost it. This is our house, surrounded.
Wow.
This is our uncle's house. And this is my cousin's here. Look, they took his garden. And they make it parking lot.
They took her garden, which is over there on this side of the wall, and made it a parking lot.
And from there, it's just a quick drive down the road to the Palestine Museum of Natural History.
And so if one wants to make a difference in life,
This is Mazen Kumsia, the founder of the
one
museum.
has to think globally and act locally.
The word museum often implies stale hallways full of taxidermied animals, but in Palestine, nothing can exist that does not make a political statement.
Ultimately, everything is politics. Even when you do environmental work, it's politics. Environmental situations interconnected to the political situation. For example, we did some articles on the effect of the Israeli industrial settlements on human health and on biodiversity here.
So in this article, titled Genotoxicity of Recycling Electronic Waste in Edna, Palestine, the museum documents the effect of e-waste recycling, especially burning of computer parts, on chromosomal and DNA damage in Edna, Hebron.
Because they put their most polluting industries near Palestinian areas. This study showed DNA damage and chromosome breaks in humans, and it obviously also impacts other animals and plants in the area.
What they did is they went to a town called Edna, which receives hundreds of tons of e-waste every day, most of it through the Tarkumia checkpoint. Here's a picture of an electronic recycling facility next to a school. They collected blood samples from 45 subjects from Edna and then 16 control subjects from Bethlehem, and then tested those samples for chromosomal aberrations. Chromosomal aberrations are these macromutations like rings or deletions or breaks which can cause cell damage and eventually cancer. What they found was that for the e-waste exposed group, the total number of chromosomal aberrations averaged 4.84, but for the control sample, the average was just 0.75.
Compared to control sites, there's more DNA damage and chromosome damage.
And so they conclude that the significantly increased levels in Edna thus portend a true effect of e-waste. This is a particularly stark example of an interconnected environmental and political problem, but in Palestine, anything the museum writes is politicized. Every paper the museum publishes starts with a sentence like, "Butterflies were collected in the occupied West Bank, Palestinian territories."
Just mention the Palestinian territory or West Bank or occupied Palestine, this word in your topics or publication. It's like really kind of resistant, because you are like, okay, I'm telling the universe, we are still Palestinian, we are here, we are not like vanish or something. But just look, and when we first published our first paper about butterfly, they rejected. Why? Because we put Palestine. It's sometimes difficult.
What this means is that a paper about Palestinian butterflies is about much more than butterflies. It's about the right to exist.
Of course, we have occupation here, we have colonization, we have ethnic cleansing and racism that's ongoing on a daily basis. Should we wait until we have our freedom to protect our environment? Should we wait until we have our freedom to deal with the catastrophic effect of the colonization on our environment? The answer that I gave and that the people who work with me, the volunteers, gave is no. We say on the wall also, it's written, to exist is to resist. And yes, working on the environment is also a form of resistance, because when we clean our environment, it increases, for example, the attachment to Palestinian children, to the land, to their environment, to feel hopefulness, to remove any sense of despair that this is going to always continue like this. So when I teach my students, when I give them courses in environmental biology or in biodiversity or in things like that, this is a sense of hopefulness, that there is actually a light at the end of the tunnel of this occupation and colonization.
This is Palestine. Every stone is fought over. Every tree matters. Here, a museum doesn't just archive the past, it fights hard for the future.
So to exist in Palestine is to resist. To exist here, to love our land, to love our nature, to love birds and animals and plants and flowers, to love the land and the landscape. These are all forms of resistance.
A mosaic at the entrance to the museum reads, "Here we will stay, in Lydda, in Ramleh, in the Galilee, we shall remain. Like a wall on your chest, and in your throat, like a shard of glass, a cactus thorn, and in your eyes, a sandstorm." Thanks for watching. This video is part of the EVOS seminar series. We are both a university class and a YouTube channel. We host speakers who give live lectures and then we make videos about them. There are links to Dr. Kumsia's full lecture as well as the papers that he mentioned in the description below. You can click subscribe to watch more videos like this one, and I will see you next time.
You remember the Jewish Hayas organization, which was a special target of the killer of Jews in the Pittsburgh synagogue a few years ago. Well, there's a Hayas Israel group, and it does work and it is concerned about immigrants to Israel. It did a recent study about people, mainly Africans, who had fled to Israel. It noted that from the years 2011 to 2019, there were 64,000 requests for asylum, especially from people from Eritrea and Sudan. The Israeli government approved 39. 39 out of 64,000. Then there were the requests. The government said it would review after a court found their initial process flawed. It was supposed to review 13,000 cases, but so far it has only looked at 32 of the 13,000 cases. Attorney Nimrod Avigal, Deputy Director of Hayas Israel, said, "Ignoring the asylum requests of Sudanese and Eritreans takes place while the country calls them illegal infiltrators and invests huge resources to get them to give up their requests instead of doing the basic thing it is supposed to do." The corporate media is all thrilled that the United Arab Emirates are establishing open diplomatic relations with Israel. We'll deal with this at length in a future program. Let's just mention what the Emirates are: a collection of absolute monarchs living in splendor with a workforce mainly of immigrants living in slums. The Emirates also participate with the Saudis in the savaging of Yemen and the killing of tens of thousands of Yemeni civilians. They are indeed fit allies for apartheid Israel. Now, more about the Israeli Jews protesting their government for their wretched economic situation and mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. course, the Jewish state sends its brutal border police to put them down. Now, Democracy Now! About Trump's efforts through executive order bypassing Congress and supposedly giving people aid as the $600 special unemployment payment has expired.
This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump signed 4 executive orders Saturday, including measures to extend unemployment benefits and defer payroll taxes after Congress failed to agree on a new coronavirus bill. But it does not look like those unemployment benefits will necessarily be seen by people who are unemployed. A number of Republican lawmakers joined Democrats slamming Trump's actions as unconstitutional. Democrats had hoped to extend a program to give unemployed workers an additional $600 in weekly benefits and to extend a federal moratorium protecting some renters from evictions. Under Trump's order, unemployed workers would continue receiving an additional $400 a week, but only once states put up a quarter of that money and set up a new system to distribute the payments, a process that could take months if they can afford it at all. Trump also signed an executive order on evictions, but it won't stop any evictions from happening. It simply instructs the Treasury Department and the Department of Housing and Urban Development to consider taking action. Trump also ordered the deferral of payroll tax collections for workers earning under $100,000, but the taxes will still need to be paid back next year after the election. And Trump vowed to pursue the permanent elimination of the payroll tax, which is used to fund Social Security and Medicare, if he's reelected. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi criticized Trump's executive actions in an interview with Fox News Sunday.
While it has the illusion of saying we're going to have a moratorium on evictions, it says, I'm going to ask the folks in charge to study if that's feasible. While he says he's going to do the payroll tax, what he's doing is undermining Social Security and Medicare.
Still with us, David Dayen, executive editor of The American Prospect, where he writes a daily update on the coronavirus pandemic called Unsanitized. His book is just out. It's titled Monopolized: Life in the Age of Corporate Power. So, David, talk about what happened this weekend. Talk about these executive orders, these executive actions, and what they mean. Start with unemployment, such a severe crisis in this country right now.
Yeah, so talks between Democrats and the White House broke off, and as a result, Trump decided to go forward with these executive orders. And as you mentioned, there's a lot less than meets the eye here. On unemployment, as you say, it's $400 a week, which is much less, of course, than the $600 a week boost that had been given. States are supposed to supply a quarter of that. States are obviously very cash-strapped right now. It's supposed to come from a budget that has already been given to the states, but a lot of that money is already spoken for. As for the $400 or the $300 that the government is, federal government is supposed to supply, that comes from a fund for disaster relief, FEMA disaster relief. And so, as you say, it's done under a different program that has to be now put into the state unemployment systems, which are very rickety. Some of them use programming code that is decades and decades old. And the last time when the $600 boost came in, that took weeks in some states to actually get done. And the amount of money that's being appropriated for this purpose would only last maybe 5 weeks tops, even though it's supposed to extend until December.
So, and if the state doesn't put in $100 of the $400, the federal government won't put in the other $300.
I'm not sure that is true, but the problem is that you have to get the system to actually work correctly. And each state, there's no sort of each state getting that $300. Each state has to do it, and it's first come, first serve. And if the money is drained, it's drained. There's only $44 billion appropriated. So, you know, you could see the faster states getting up to speed and states that might take months to get this done getting just locked out at the door, and their unemployed residents end up getting no benefit whatsoever. Even a state that is quote unquote fast about this, but residents are probably not seeing any unemployment extended benefits until at least September.
So Trump walked out of
the question is, while I do believe that these are unconstitutional, Congress has the power of the purse. He's reprogramming funds. Who is exactly going to sue over this and deny workers even a meager amount of unemployment benefits? I think that this is going to set a really dangerous precedent that executives have much more power in the fiscal realm than previously thought.
As the government is giving billions to companies, for example, around viruses, some that have never, around vaccines that have never even made vaccines. I mean, billions and billions of dollars. What about the moratorium on evictions?
I mean, it's a non-proposal. It's an order that says, hey, HUD and Treasury, come up with something. Help us out. Maybe don't allow people to be evicted or foreclosed upon. It is not an extension of the moratorium in any way, either on evictions or on foreclosures. It's completely unknown what steps will be taken by Treasury or the Department of Housing and Urban Development in exchange. And it protects really nobody. The only protections that are in place are at the state level, and many of those are expiring. And of course, when you take away that $600 a week support from unemployment, a lot of these unemployed residents who are going to be, many of whom are renters, are going to have trouble making that next rent payment. The Census Bureau put together a thing called the Household Pulse Survey, and it shows about 1/4 of Americans who are renting fear that they're not going to be able to make that next payment.
And talk about the payroll tax. Trump basically saying what this means for Social Security.
Yeah, it's a deferral. So it's you're eventually going to have to pay that. I suspect a lot of businesses will just put that money in escrow so that they're not told later down the road, oh, you have to pay all that, and then garnishing their employees' checks to the tune of entire checks worth. So I suspect this will have almost no stimulative effect. If Trump succeeds in making this permanent, of course, he would need Congress to do that. But that would be a complete undermining of the system of funding for Social Security and Medicare.
The point, evidently, is to drive workers back to work, no matter how unsafe conditions are. Now, really, this is nothing new. Before World War I, it was routine for workers to sicken and die, while owners got richer and richer. And from Middle East Eye, an honest look at some Arabs who are racist against blacks.
This is not solidarity. It's racist, and it needs to stop. These are two pictures of Arab celebrities who decided to wade into the Black Lives Matter conversation in the worst way possible, by painting their faces black. I know. What? On the left we have Mariam Hussein, a Moroccan actress. On the right, Tania Saleh, a Lebanese singer. But beyond being an extremely tone-deaf and blatantly offensive gesture, which in no way helps the situation, it actually speaks to two very long traditions in Arabic society: blackface and anti-blackness. While the history of blackface stems primarily from 19th century United States, where minstrel shows depicted grotesque portrayals of black people for entertainment, a time where black actors were also not allowed to perform on stage, the practice never truly died out. Nowadays, we often hear about it when a public figure or celebrity is caught doing it. But in Arabic media, this practice not only remains unchallenged, it's been a staple comedy trope in TV and film for decades.
دايما كل ما بشوف مسلسل أو شيء يعني شيء عربي محطوط وحاطين حدا عامل بلاك فيس، هيدا الشيء يعني كتير مقيت، يعني كتير بشع، وقوام دايما بقلبه، يعني خلص ما فيني اطلع يعني.
This is Lama Amin, a theater practitioner from Lebanon who in recent weeks spoke out against the incidence of blackface.
يعني بشو يعني ما بعرف شو هالسبورت انه نحن هلا ترندي، نحن هلا مع السود وهيك. لا حبيبتي، نحن ما بدنا هيك. هلا ليش انا طلعت على تانيا صالح في هيك؟ لانه مش مقبول حدا بال2020 وخصوصا هلا يعني بالثوره اللي عم بتصير بامريكا تطلع بهيدي الطريقه تقول للعالم انه انا مع البلاك بيبل بالبلاك فيس تاعولا. انا كتير بنزعج لانه ما بتعرفوا الاشخاص اللي مثلي او تانيين قد مرقوا بمشاكل انه عم بيعانوا انه لانه بشرتهم سمراء بالعالم العربي عم بعيشوا بهيدا، يجي حدا يتمسخرهم. هيدا الشيء كتير مزعج.
And as often the case with harmful representation, these jokes and sentiments translate into the way black people are treated in real life.
يعني كل الاكسبيرينس اللي انا عشتها يعني لما كنت صغيره كانت صعبه وكانت يعني حدا يوقفك كل الوقت على الطريق ليقول لك انت اسود، ليهجموا عليك كل الوقت بتعابير كتير بشعه وبتدل على جهل وعلى قلة أخلاق. يعني أكتر موقف أثر فيي يمكن لما معلمتي بالمدرسة كان بدهم يعملوا المسرحية وقالت لي أنت لا هيك إنه أنت ما فيك تكوني بالمسرحية. هذا الشيء كتير ضايقني لأنه كأنه أنا مش موجودة. يعني أنا كأنه حسيت إنه ماني موجودة وهاي كل السنين اللي عشتها بهالمدرسة حسستني إنه كنت كاسبر. حسستني وهذا الشيء بضايق. ومنشان هيك أنا قررت أعمل مسرح، لأنه المسرح كتير ساعدني إنه أطلع من خجلي أول شيء، وخلاني أكون قوية، وخلاني يعني شوف الاشياء بطريقه تانية. Black Lives Matter هلا لكل العالم بالعالم العربي انه عم بتحطها بس مش عم تفهم شو معناتها. ما عم تفهم تاريخ السود بامريكا، تاريخ السود ببريطانيا، بدهم يعرفوا تاريخ السود بالعالم العربي شو هو.
Now some of you may be thinking things are different in the US because of its long history with slavery. But guess what? The Arab world is not so innocent there either. We often hear the story of Bilal al-Habashi retold in Muslim circles, the African slave who was emancipated and became the first person to make the call to prayer during the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But slavery didn't end at the time of the Prophet. It continued for hundreds of years. And while it wasn't exclusively sub-Saharan Africans, historians estimate millions of East Africans from places like Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique were captured and sold in Zanzibar before being taken to Egypt, Morocco, Oman, and other places. It also took a very long time for it to be outlawed, and countries like Saudi Arabia and Yemen didn't do so until the 1970s. In Mauritania, it wasn't made illegal until 1981, the last country in the world to do so. Still, human rights groups estimate about 18% of the population in Mauritania is still enslaved today. Back in 2010, former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi actually came out and apologized to Africans for the role Arabs and North Africans played in promoting and facilitating the slave trade.
أنا أدين وأقدم باسم العرب الاعتذار والتأسف الشديد للسلوك الذي سلكه العرب وخاصة الأغنياء منهم اتجاه أخوانهم الأفارقة، حيث شروا الأطفال وجلبوهم إلى شمال أفريقيا وإلى الجزيرة العربية واستعبدوهم وباعوهم واشتروهم وباعوهم، استعمروهم واستغلوهم حتى هذا اليوم.
Unfortunately, in the wake of the current civil war in Libya, a slave market has re-emerged, and most of its victims are young African migrants trying to make their way to Europe. Today, many also draw parallels between slavery and the kafala system popular in places like Lebanon and the Gulf, where millions of migrant workers are stripped of their passports and their employment rights and left at the mercy of their employers. So while it's easy to empathize with the struggles of African Americans and the Black Lives Matter movement, there's still so much work that needs to be done in our own communities.
People will always talk about the obvious ways, right? Of the blackface that we might see watching an Arabic comedy, right? Or the language that people might use that is deeply violent, right? The way in which the word abid is used in the Arab world. But there's also structural levels of anti-blackness that exist in the Arab world as well.
Rana Abdelhamid, a community organizer from New York, helped put together this online tool to help educate Arabs and Arab parents that outlines steps like refraining from using derogatory terms and having conversations with family members about racist stereotypes.
As soon as we posted it, people were like, how do we translate this to Arabic? How can I translate this to French? How can I translate this to Dutch? How can I translate this to Spanish, right? And it went viral, right? Like people really shared it. It started conversation. I think it's a soul-searching time for anyone who's not Black right now, for us to be like, how are we perpetuating this and how can we stop?
There's still a long way to go. Nayan Hussein has since taken down the image after a public backlash, but Tanya Saleh chose instead to double down, insisting her image was well-intentioned. With more people talking about the issue of blackface and anti-blackness in Arab societies, and with everything happening in terms of the Black Lives Matter protests in the US and across the world, this is a conversation that is only beginning. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please leave your thoughts below. Let us know what conversations you've been having with your friends and with your family in these very historic times.
That's our program at this time. Stay safe, folks, but stay active. See you next week. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.